Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Horror Stories. I know many of you use these episodes to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Story 1. I grew up in a small town in Kentucky, one of those places where everyone knows your name, your business, and even your family's history going back 3 generations. It was 1976, and I had just turned 17. My life revolved around school, church, and every now and then, a movie at the drive-in with my best friend Ellie. My father owned a modest hardware store on Main Street, and my mother was the kind of woman who ironed even the pillowcases and wouldn't allow a meal without giving thanks first, even at breakfast. Everything was quiet, predictable, until Caleb Turner came into my life. Caleb was the son of Judge Raymond Turner, a man whose mere presence was enough to make everyone fall silent. In town, people either feared or respected him. Caleb, on the other hand, was nothing like his father. He had a natural charm, the kind of magnetism that made girls forget their good manners. His smile was lazy, his hair looked sun-bleached, and the way he spoke made you feel like you were the only person in the world. That summer, we started seeing each other in secret. I didn't tell anyone, not even Ellie. I knew exactly what people would say, that I wasn't good enough for him. When I found out I was pregnant, I was sitting on the edge of my bed holding a pharmacy test I had bought in a town 2 hours away, just to avoid being recognized. My hands were trembling so much I almost dropped it. The first person I told was Caleb. I was scared, yes, but part of me believed he would take responsibility, that together we could find a way. At first, he didn't say much. He just sat in silence, staring at the floor and biting the inside of his cheek. The next day, he came back and told me that his family would take care of everything. At that moment, I didn't realize how literal that promise would turn out to be. A week later, my life changed completely. My parents were told that I had suffered a nervous breakdown. That was the exact word they used, breakdown. They were told I was sick and that it would be best for me to stay somewhere quiet to recover. And so they sent me to live with a distant cousin of my mother's, in an old farmhouse nearly 50 miles away. There was no phone, no car, no way to contact anyone. It wasn't even my father who took me there. It was Caleb's uncle. He didn't say a single word the entire trip. I remember looking out the window the whole way, watching the trees pass by and feeling like I was slowly disappearing. The farmhouse was old and had that sour smell of dust and mothballs. The woman I was supposed to stay with, whom I was told to call Aunt Margaret, though I had never seen her before, was in her 60s. She always wore orthopedic shoes and kept the curtains closed, as if the sun were her enemy. She never asked questions, never offered comfort. There was no television or radio in her house, and the only books I could find were religious pamphlets and a Bible so old its pages crackled when I touched them. I spent my days staring out the back window, watching the wind move across the empty fields, waiting for something, anything to break the silence, but nothing ever happened. It was as if time had stopped there. At night I lay awake, listening to the sounds of the old house, the creaking wood, the wind seeping through the cracks, the distant coyotes. I wasn't allowed to go into town. Aunt Margaret said it was for my own good. I had no idea what people back home were saying about me. Neither Ellie nor my parents ever wrote to me. Weeks turned into months. My belly grew, and with it, the silence surrounding me. I felt like a ghost trapped in someone else's story. Sometimes I talked to the baby just to hear my own voice. I remember whispering, "I don't know what they're doing to us, but I promise I'll get you out of here." One morning I heard voices outside. I looked out the window and saw Judge Turner's black Buick parked on the dirt road, the dust still swirling around its tires. He didn't come inside. He stayed on the porch, talking to Aunt Margaret in that low, controlled tone that was somehow more frightening than shouting. She kept nodding, eyes fixed on the ground. When he left, she came into the house with a suitcase and told me I needed to pack. "They've found a better place," she explained. She gave no details, no answers. I asked where we were going, but she didn't reply. She just pointed at the suitcase and walked out of the room. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking over and over, what if I disappear completely? The next day, Caleb showed up. It was the first time I had seen him in months. He looked thinner, pale, with dark circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept either. He wouldn't look me in the eye. He stood by the door while Aunt Margaret handed him the suitcase. Then he mumbled something about a clinic in Ohio, that they would pay for everything, that it was for the best. I begged him not to take me anywhere, to talk to my parents, to tell the truth. That's when he broke. He shouted that it was too late, that everything was already arranged. I didn't fully understand what he meant, but the way he said it chilled my blood. I never went to any clinic. That very night, when Aunt Margaret was asleep, I took the suitcase she had packed and slipped out the back door without making a sound. I walked for what felt like hours, guided only by the moonlight and the crunch of gravel under my shoes. I didn't know exactly where I was going, only that I needed to get away before they erased me completely. Finally, I found a gas station. It had a payphone on the side, but I had no money. The attendant, a skinny boy with long hair and a kind face, let me make a call. I dialed the only number I still remembered by heart, Ellie's. When she answered, I could barely speak. I just said, "It's me. I need help." 6 hours later, Ellie arrived driving her brother's old Chevy Nova. When she saw me, she burst into tears. She told me that everyone believed I had been admitted to a private clinic somewhere out west. My parents had been told I didn't want visitors, that I needed space. Caleb, meanwhile, had gone back to school as if nothing had happened. I stayed with Ellie and her family for a few weeks, hiding in the basement. Her parents were discreet, but it was obvious they knew something was wrong. They never asked questions. They simply let me stay. Over time, I found a women's shelter in Louisville, a place that helped girls in my situation. There, I gave birth to a baby girl with a full head of dark hair. I named her Hope. It was the only word that gave me strength. Hope. Years passed before I learned the whole truth. At a wedding, one of Caleb's cousins, drunk and loose-tongued, told someone what had really happened. How the Turners had invented the story of my mental breakdown, forged medical documents, and bribed a doctor to back it all up. The plan had been simple: to solve everything quietly, give my baby up for adoption without my consent, and pretend I had never existed. To them, I was nothing more than a problem to be erased. I never saw Caleb again. I heard he became a lawyer, just like his father. I, on the other hand, changed my name, left Kentucky, and raised Hope on my own. Today she's in college, smart, strong, and full of an energy that lights up everything around her. I still haven't told her the whole story. Someday I will, but not because I want her to pity me. It'll be so she understands how far some people will go to protect their power, and how far one must go to protect oneself. There are still people in that town who believe I had a nervous breakdown. Maybe it's better that way. Let them think I disappeared. The truth is different. I survived. Story 2. I've never been a superstitious person. I don't believe in ghosts or witches or secret cults hidden in the woods. Or at least I didn't. I'm 28 years old, live alone in a rented house in Jackson, Mississippi, and until a few weeks ago, my biggest worries were paying rent and figuring out why my car made a strange noise when reversing. I like hiking on weekends, mostly to clear my mind. A group of friends, Jordan, Will, Rachel, and me, all college friends, planned a trip to a wooded area about an hour and a half east of Jackson. It was public land, unmarked, quiet, and secluded. Nothing out of the ordinary. A one-day hike with snacks, photos, and no cell signal. I wish we had turned back the moment we saw the first cross. We had wandered off the trail, as we often did when marked paths got boring. That's when Rachel saw something that looked like an animal skull nailed to a tree. At first, we thought it was some hunter's odd decoration, a kind of southern folk art. But then we started to notice more things. Dozens of handmade wooden crosses, crooked, nailed into the ground. Strips of old, dirty clothing tied to the lower branches. Some objects looked very old, almost rotten. There were also small rag dolls and remnants of what appeared to be melted candles embedded in the dirt. The whole place had a dense, oppressive feeling, as if the trees were closing in on us. No one said it out loud, but we were all scared. I took several photos, close-ups of the crosses, the bones, even a sweatshirt that seemed to have dried bloodstains. Will told me to stop, but I didn't take him seriously. I thought I could later post them on a hiking forum, one of those threads where people share strange things they find in the woods. None of us dared to move closer to the center of the clearing. There was one tree larger than all the others, thick, ancient, covered in carvings, with more bones nailed into the bark. We stood there in silence until Jordan said, "We should go," and without argument we left. It should have ended there, but it didn't. That night when I got home, I uploaded 3 of the photos online. Nothing that revealed the location or our faces, just images of the objects. A few hours later, past midnight, I received the first message. It had no text, just a photo. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. It was my front entrance taken from across the street. My car was in the driveway and the porch light was on. That photo had been taken only a few minutes before it arrived. I ran to the window. Nothing, just darkness and silence. I didn't sleep that night. Every time a car passed by or a branch moved outside, I got up to check the windows. I turned off all the lights and sat on the couch, phone in hand, waiting. Nothing else happened until 3:12 a.m. I remembered the exact time because I was looking at the clock when the second message arrived. Another photo. This time it was closer. My front window. You could see the curtain half drawn, and behind it the faint reflection of the TV. I was in that room when it was taken. My stomach tightened. I ran to the window, threw it open, and shouted into the darkness. Nothing. I checked every lock in the house twice before sitting back down. The next morning, I called Jordan. I didn't want to sound paranoid, so I just asked if he'd noticed anything strange since the hike. He hesitated for a moment before saying he'd received a message too, but his was a blank screen. No image, no text. Rachel and Will hadn't received anything, at least not yet. We all felt uneasy, with that sickening sense that we had seen something we weren't supposed to see. I deleted the posts and removed the photos immediately, but I had the feeling it was already too late. That same day, I installed a security camera above the front door. Even though I live in a quiet neighborhood, it didn't make me feel any safer. That night, I didn't receive any messages, and for a moment I thought it was over. But the next morning, when I checked the footage, I saw it. At 2:47 a.m., someone had walked up to my porch steps and stood there for nearly 5 minutes. They never rang the bell, never knocked, just stood there. The image was blurry, but I could make out a hood, dark jeans, and something hanging around their neck. Maybe a necklace or a bone. At one point, the person turned toward the camera and looked directly into the lens, but their face was completely covered in shadow. I called the police. I showed them the video. They filed a report, but nothing else happened. By the end of that week, Rachel texted us. She was crying. Her cat had disappeared. She told us that morning she found her back door open, even though she always locked it. She lives alone, and since then she hasn't spent a single night without her brother staying over. Will, on the other hand, barely talks about it. He's not one to show emotion, but the last time I saw him, he looked shaken. He said that at night he heard things outside, branches snapping, soft knocks, as if someone were tapping. We all agreed on the same thing. We should never have touched anything, never taken photos, and especially never posted them online. I started leaving the lights on at night, even in empty rooms. I felt like someone was constantly watching me. Every time I took out the trash or walked to my car, I had the feeling someone was hiding just out of sight. The messages didn't stop, but they changed. They were no longer photos. Now they were single words. Repent. Return. Look. Sometimes they said nothing at all, just the sound of a notification at 2 or 3 in the morning. I stopped opening them. I changed my number, but it didn't help. The messages kept coming from unknown numbers, impossible to trace. It seemed they didn't want me to reply, just to remind me that someone was still out there. A few days later, I came home and found something nailed to the tree in my backyard. A small wooden cross, crude, wrapped with feathers and string. I have no idea how anyone could have gotten in. I have a locked gate, and the yard is fully fenced. I called the police again. They came, took another report, and left. Nothing else. That night I slept in my car 2 streets away. I didn't want to be near the house. I didn't want that person or whatever it was to know I was still there. And then suddenly it all stopped. No more messages. No more figures on the camera. No strange noises outside. Even the air in the house felt different, lighter. I never found out who sent the photos or who left that cross. None of us did. Jordan moved to another state. Rachel stopped hiking altogether. Will deleted all his social media. We barely talk now. I think we all try to forget what happened, as if ignoring it would make it disappear. But I know better. Sometimes I still think about that tree, the carvings, the bones, the way it seemed ancient, used for years. I don't hike off marked trails anymore. In fact, I hardly ever leave the city. And every once in a while, very late at night, I think I hear a soft knock somewhere in the house. Whenever it happens, I freeze. I never check. I don't want to know. That's the worst part. Not knowing. Not knowing what we saw, what we interrupted, or why it followed us. I've learned something. There are places that were forgotten for a reason, and things that don't want to stay buried. Story 3. I grew up in a small town in Nebraska, one of those that barely shows up on the map. A place where everyone knows your name, your story, and your family's secrets. I'm 28 now, but what happened when I was 14 still clings to my mind, like something that never quite ended. Back then, Halloween was the most exciting time of the year. It wasn't about trick-or-treating anymore, but about messing with old Mr. Delvin. He lived in a weathered brick house at the very end of our street, just before the road vanished into the cornfields. He must have been around 70. Always wore high-waisted pants and a mustard-stained t-shirt, and he hated kids, especially my brother Nate and me. Every Halloween was a kind of war, us against Delvin. In 5th grade, we covered his whole porch with toilet paper. In 6th, we slipped a rubber snake into his mailbox. By 8th, we had already left fake arms buried in his yard, stink bombs under his windows, and Nate even set up a speaker in the bushes to scream at random. Every time the old man came out enraged, waving his flashlight like a sword and barking threats in his raspy voice, we ended up doubled over with laughter. He never called the police or our parents. He only muttered something about how the time to pay would come. We thought he was just a grouchy old man with no guts. That year, Halloween fell on a Saturday, and the night was strangely warm, perfect for staying out late. Nate and I had planned our big final prank for weeks. But as we passed in front of Delvin's house at dusk, we saw something that stopped us cold. His house was decorated. There were paper skeletons taped to the windows, an inflatable pumpkin in the yard, and flickering lights on the porch. It all looked cheap, as if someone had bought a last-minute decoration pack and thrown it up in a hurry. But that was the weird part. Delvin never decorated anything. Nate elbowed me and said, "He's trying to beat us. We can't leave it like that." We waited until 10:30, when the last kids had already vanished from the streets. Nate carried his tools bag, smoke bombs, a motion sensor sound device, and a plastic doll smeared with fake blood. Nothing dangerous, just fun chaos. We slipped around the back of his property, crouching behind the row of shrubs that bordered the yard. Everything was dark except for the faint orange glow from the porch. There was no sound. Not the TV, not the hum of the radio he used to keep on. It was a silence that felt staged, as if everything had been set up. I whispered to Nate, "I don't like this." He grinned, tossed me the sound device, and said, "That's the point. Let's mess it all up." We didn't know that this time he was the one playing with us. We split up, like we always did. Nate headed toward the shed near the back fence, and I stayed closer to the house. I was looking for a good place to hide the sound device when I noticed something strange. The inflatable pumpkin on the porch was slowly deflating, as if someone had punctured it. But there was no one there. I figured maybe it had an air leak, though the whole scene was starting to feel wrong. I crouched behind a shrub, waiting to see the flash of Nate's flashlight. Then I heard the creak of a door opening, followed by a loud metallic thud. After that, silence. No footsteps, no voices, nothing. I waited a full minute, then another. I whispered his name, Nate. No answer. I stood and moved toward the shed. From the outside, it looked as old and run down as everything else on Delvin's property, with the lower boards rotted and the paint peeling. But something was different. The padlock was closed. Nate didn't have any keys. I knocked softly on the door. Nate, I said under my breath. Nothing. I knocked harder, my heart pounding in my ears. That's when I saw it. A small battery-powered trail camera mounted in the corner of the shed, its red light blinking. And just below it, nailed to the wood, a piece of cardboard with a single word scrawled in crooked black letters. Tricked. That's when I understood. The old man had set a trap for us. I felt my stomach drop and my skin prickle. I stepped back, looking around, expecting Delvin to emerge from the shadows with his flashlight. But no one appeared. The silence wasn't empty. It was a silence that watched. I yanked the padlock hard, but it didn't give. I struck it with a rock, useless. And then I heard something inside the shed. A faint sound like a movement or a muffled groan. It was Nate. Panic tore through me. I ran for the road until I was under the yellow light of the street lamp. My heart hammered in my chest. I had two options: ask for help, which meant waking my parents or even calling the police and admitting we'd been pestering the old man for years, or go back and get him out myself before dawn. I looked toward the dark house, then toward the empty road. Not a car, not a light, just the icy wind and an ever-clearer sense that we'd gotten ourselves into something far too big. I couldn't leave him there. I ran back onto the property, heart pounding. I tried every door and window, praying one would be open. Nothing. Everything locked. Windows sealed, the front door bolted. Sweat ran down my forehead despite the cold. Then I saw a small window near the basement, its frame rotten and splintered. I pulled out Nate's screwdriver. It was still in the prank bag, and wedged it into the wood, prying until the window gave just enough for me to squeeze through. As soon as I dropped inside, I regretted it. The air was heavy, damp, with a smell of mold and something metallic. Blood, maybe. The air in the basement was thick, stale, and smelled of mold mixed with something metallic, like old iron or dried blood. I turned on my phone's flashlight and crept forward. There were piles of rusty tools, stacked furniture, and a dozen Halloween decorations covered in dust. Masks, fake limbs, costumes still in their packaging. It looked like old Mr. Delvin had been stockpiling things for years, as if he had been preparing for something. Every step creaked on the boards and forced me to hold my breath. I tiptoed up the stairs, avoiding the squeaky spots. I reached the kitchen, dark, messy. On the table was a flashlight, still on, still warm to the touch. That meant Delvin had been there recently. I hurried through the house and slid back the bolt on the rear door. Then I ran to the shed. With Nate's screwdriver, I pulled the hinge pins from the outside. It took longer than I wanted, but I finally got it open. Nate was inside, sitting on the floor, pale, his knees pulled tight to his chest. He had duct tape on his wrists, but he was conscious. The inside of the shed wasn't empty. The walls were covered with photographs, dozens of them, photos of us, from previous years. Us in costumes on Halloween, walking past his house, laughing, throwing toilet paper. There were images taken from our window, in our room at night. I froze. Delvin had been watching us all that time, waiting, planning. The message was clear. I saw you. I always saw you. And now it was your turn. Nate didn't say a word. Neither did I. I just helped him to his feet, and we ran out of there without looking back. We didn't tell anyone that night. We never did. After that, we never went near Mr. Delvin's property again. He didn't speak to us either. He didn't call the police, didn't report us, didn't mention anything. It was as if it had never happened. But every Halloween after that, his house appeared decorated exactly the same way. The paper skeletons, the inflatable pumpkin, the flickering lights. Always the same decorations. And we knew he didn't do it for the holiday. It was a reminder, a warning, a silent notice that he was still there, attentive. Now every time I go back to my town and pass that old brick house, the feeling returns. That low hum under the skin. That question I've never been able to erase. What would have happened if I hadn't gone back for Nate? Story 4. I've never posted anything like this before, but after what happened last year, I need to tell it. Maybe someone out there has gone through something similar. I'm 20 now, but it all happened when I was 18, in my senior year of high school. I live in a small town in Illinois, one of those places where everyone knows everyone, and nothing stays secret for long. And that was exactly what made everything worse. At the time, I was dating a new girl named Brooke, and things were going really well, until I got back in touch with someone from my past. Megan, a girl I hadn't spoken to since middle school. Megan and I had dated in 7th grade, if you could even call it that. We held hands at lunch and texted nonstop after school. Nothing serious. We were just kids. One night, years later, she messaged me on Instagram. She said she'd seen one of my posts and just wanted to say hi. It seemed harmless. We exchanged a few messages, laughed about old times, and I told her I was seeing someone. She didn't seem to care. She said she was happy for me and that she'd love to catch up sometime. I didn't see anything strange about it. I thought it was just a conversation between old friends. At first, it really did feel innocent. We talked every once in a while. No flirting, no weirdness. Just catching up. She had moved to a nearby town about 30 minutes away, worked part-time and sounded like she had her life together. But over time, the messages started coming more often, then longer, and finally at odd hours, like 2 or 3 in the morning. Obviously, I didn't reply at those hours, but when I woke up, I'd find entire paragraphs where she said she missed how we used to talk, that she'd never gotten over me, and that seeing me with Brooke made her sick. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. I showed the messages to Brooke. At first she laughed, but I could see in her eyes that it bothered her. And I don't blame her. From that moment, everything spiraled out of control. Megan started showing up in places where she had no reason to be. One Saturday, Brooke and I went to the little diner where we always had breakfast on weekends. And there she was, alone, sitting in a booth across from ours. She didn't order anything. She just sat there watching. She pretended not to see us, but her eyes never left us. I tried to ignore it, but Brooke was visibly nervous. A few days later, Brooke started getting strange messages from an anonymous account. No profile picture, no name, just cruel messages. He's going to leave you like he left me. You're just a replacement. At first we thought it was some random troll, but then the profile started sending personal photos, pictures I had shared with Megan when we were kids. Stupid, embarrassing teenage stuff I never thought I'd see again. She had kept them all these years. And worse, she edited them to make them look recent. Then she started spreading them in school group chats, not just to Brooke, but to other classmates too. Suddenly I was getting messages from people I hadn't talked to in months, some pretending to be concerned, others just wanting more gossip. And you know how small towns are. Rumors spread faster than fire. Within days, everyone knew something, or thought they did. I wasn't the guy with a crazy ex anymore. I was the guy from the photos. I felt exposed, humiliated, out of control. Brooke tried to stay strong, but I could see how the stress was wearing her down. She stopped posting on social media, barely spoke at school, and eventually asked if we could take a break. I didn't blame her. She hadn't signed up for this nightmare. Meanwhile, Megan escalated. I started noticing her car, a black Nissan Altima, parked near my house at night. Once I went out to take out the trash around 11 p.m. and saw the car idling across the street, lights off. As soon as I stepped onto the porch, it drove away. Another night, someone knocked on my window at 2 in the morning. When I looked outside, no one was there. Only that same car parked half a block down. I tried talking to my parents, but they didn't really believe me. My dad just said, "Girls get emotional, it'll pass." And my mom told me to block her. But it wasn't that simple. Every time I blocked one account, she created another. New name, new handle, same twisted messages. I stopped sleeping well. I'd stay up all night watching the window, checking my messages, dreading that she'd written again. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach tightened. It wasn't fear of physical harm. It was fear of what she might do next. Fear that she no longer had any limits. I went to talk to the school counselor, but his response froze me. He said that since everything was happening off campus and online, there wasn't much they could do. That only gave Megan more power. She knew no one would stop her, and she got bolder. One day I found a note on my car windshield in the school parking lot. It was written in red marker and said, "I see how you look at her. You never looked at me like that." From then on, I stopped parking there. I stopped talking to classmates. I even deleted my social media for a while, trying to disappear. But somehow Megan always found a way to remind me she was still watching. The final straw came the night she went to Brooke's house. Brooke called me crying, terrified. She said someone had been pounding on her bedroom window nonstop, and right before her dad came out with a flashlight, she saw a face, Megan's, pressed against the glass. That night I drove straight to her house and called the police from the driveway. They took a report, but without proof, there wasn't much they could do. Megan denied everything, said we were the ones harassing her, and somehow they believed her. Brooke's parents, tired of the drama, told her to block me and never talk to me again. And just like that, it was over. No more messages, no more fake accounts, no more cars parked outside my house. Megan vanished from my life as if she had never existed. I don't know if someone talked to her, if she got bored, or if she found someone else to fixate on. But the damage was already done. Brooke and I never really got back together. And even though it's been almost 2 years, some classmates still whisper about the Megan thing, as if it were some funny story or old rumor. I don't usually talk about it in person. Most people don't believe me, or think I'm exaggerating. But I know what I lived through. Sometimes I admit I check her Instagram. Not out of nostalgia, but curiosity. The last time I did, I saw she was engaged to a guy from another town. She was smiling in the pictures. She looked happy, normal. And I couldn't help but think, does he know who she really is? Did she ever tell him what she did to me? Or maybe she changed. Maybe that version of her was just a lost chapter that spun out of control. I'll never know. What I do know is that someone I barely dated as a kid managed to wreck my life years later. And I still don't understand why. I don't know what broke in her, or what made her fixate on me that way. As if I owed her something, or as if she thought I belonged to her. Even now, every time I see a black Nissan Altima, my heart skips a beat. I still hesitate before accepting follow requests from accounts I don't recognize. It's been almost 2 years, and I wish I could say I'm over it. But that wouldn't be true. Sometimes I still wonder if she's still watching, if she's still waiting for something, or if one day without warning it'll all start again. Just like the first time. Story 5. I moved to a rural part of Missouri at the start of last spring looking for a quieter life after a long, complicated divorce. I had just turned 38, and between lawyers' paperwork and the emotional weight of splitting everything in half, I needed to get away. I sold what I could and bought a modest 2-bedroom house on a couple of acres on the outskirts of a small town called Cassville. It wasn't much, but it had good bones and a huge yard I planned to fix up over time. I work from home doing CAD design for construction companies, so I didn't need to live near a big city. The slow pace, the space, and the silence were exactly what I thought I needed. About 2 weeks after moving in, I decided to build a privacy fence at the back of the property. Nothing fancy, just pressure-treated posts and horizontal boards to separate me from the woods that began right behind. The ground was soft from recent rains, so I figured it would be an easy job. I borrowed an auger from my neighbor, a retired mechanic named Bill, and started digging on a Saturday morning. I remember thinking how peaceful everything felt. Birds singing, hot coffee, the sound of the auger breaking the soil, until I found something in the fourth hole. At first, I thought it was a thick root. I knelt down and started digging with a small hand shovel, but it wasn't a root. It was a bone, long, slightly curved, with a clean fracture on one end. I assumed it was from a deer or some large animal, until I unearthed what was clearly part of a skull. Not the whole thing, just the top, but enough to know it wasn't from any animal I knew. The soil was very compact, and the way the fragments were arranged chilled my blood. It didn't look like a loose bone. It looked like a buried body. I covered it back up almost immediately and went back to the house. I didn't know what the protocol was in a case like that, but I figured the sheriff's department would know what to do. I called the non-emergency line, and in less than an hour, Sheriff Dalton showed up in person. A middle-aged man, clean-shaven with a perfectly pressed uniform, like he'd stepped out of a catalog. He was friendly but distant, more like someone going through the motions than someone truly interested. I showed him the spot, even pointed to the exact place where the bone was, but he barely looked at it. He said something like, "It's probably just a cow or a hunting dog. People used to bury animals all over this area." I asked if he was going to have it analyzed or call someone, and he just shook his head. Wouldn't be the first time folks mistake animal bones for human. Something about how quickly he dismissed it didn't sit right with me. I'm no expert, but I've seen enough animal bones to notice the difference. This one was too smooth, too rounded, and the proportions unmistakably human. Even so, I didn't push it. He was the sheriff, and I was just the new guy in the neighborhood. When he left, I sat on the porch for almost an hour, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But I couldn't bring myself to keep digging. I put the tools away and decided to wait until the following weekend just to clear my head. The next Monday, something strange happened. While I was working in the kitchen, I saw a dark SUV pull into my driveway. At first, I thought it was a delivery, or maybe someone lost. But no, it was Sheriff Dalton again, this time out of uniform, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, holding 2 coffees and a cardboard tray. I opened the door a little puzzled, and he smiled like we were old friends. He said he was in the area and thought we could talk a bit more about the backyard situation. Out of pure courtesy, I invited him in. He handed me one of the coffees like some kind of friendly offering. We sat at the kitchen table. We chatted about small things, the weather, fishing, the specials at the local diner. Everything seemed normal, until he leaned forward and asked if I'd thought about selling the property. I fell silent, surprised. He went on, saying something like, "I've always liked this lot. I wouldn't mind buying it if you ever decide to move." I gave an awkward laugh and told him I had barely settled in. He nodded as if he already expected that answer and added, "Well, if you ever think about it, I can offer cash, off the books. No middlemen, no paperwork." His tone was relaxed, but his eyes were fixed on mine, with an expression so measured it made my skin crawl. The rest of the conversation is blurry in my memory. I only remember that pressure in my chest, as if my gut were screaming at me not to accept anything he said. When he left, I stood by the window watching him drive away, and that's when I noticed it. There was fresh mud on the wheels of his SUV. I wouldn't have thought much of it, if not for the color. It was the same reddish mud from my backyard, the kind that clung to boots like wet clay and took days to dry. I couldn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house sounded louder than usual. I couldn't stop thinking about his forced smile, his sudden visit, the dirt on his car. At 2 in the morning, I grabbed a flashlight and went out to the yard. I walked to the area where I'd been digging and stood there, looking at the ground. And then I saw it. The terrain wasn't the same, just a slight difference in how the earth was compacted, a faint depression, but enough to know someone had been there. I hadn't touched anything since Saturday, and since the sheriff's visit, no one else should have been in that part of the property. But someone had dug again. In that moment, I knew I couldn't let it go. The next morning, I called Jason, a college friend who worked in forensics in Springfield. I told him just enough to raise his concern, without mentioning names. He agreed to come that weekend with equipment to check the soil and, if possible, take samples. For the first time in days, I felt a little relief. At least someone I trusted was going to get involved. But the calm didn't last. 2 days before Jason arrived, I came back from the grocery store and noticed something odd. The front door was slightly ajar. My heart jumped immediately. I went in slowly, expecting the worst, but there were no signs of forced entry. Nothing broken, nothing ransacked. Only one thing was missing: my laptop. The computer had been on the dining table when I left that morning. They hadn't taken anything else. No cash, no tools, not even my phone. Just the laptop. I didn't report it. Honestly, I didn't know who to trust. If the sheriff was really involved, who was I supposed to call? His own office. I didn't want to see him again, much less let him back into my house. That night I sat on the porch feeling like I had gotten myself into something way too big, as if I had stumbled onto something I was never meant to find. Even so, Jason kept his word and showed up that weekend. He brought a case with sampling gear and cameras to document everything. But when we went to the back of the property, the hole was gone. Someone had filled it in completely. The earth was packed down hard, harder than before, and someone had even thrown some rocks on top, like they wanted it to look old. Jason looked at me without saying a word. He took a soil sample anyway, in case anything remained. A few days later, he called me with the results. There was nothing conclusive. Too much mixed material, no clear traces of bone or blood. He said that technically it could have been anything, but from his tone I knew he didn't fully believe that either. A month later, I put the house on the market. I didn't tell anyone the reason. I just said I wanted to move closer to the city. An older couple looking for a quiet place to retire bought it. I felt guilty handing over the keys, but at that point, I just wanted to leave. I never heard from Sheriff Dalton again. His SUV disappeared from the neighborhood, and no one mentioned him anymore. I've moved twice since then. Even so, I can't quite feel at ease. Every time I see a patrol car go by, I feel that same knot in my chest. I don't know what was buried in my backyard or who put it there, but I know it wasn't a cow. And I also know with absolute certainty that there are people willing to do whatever it takes to keep certain things buried. Story 6. I moved into that apartment during my second year of college because it was the only place in town I could afford without having a roommate. It was a small fourplex on the outskirts of town, tucked behind an abandoned gas station and a few empty lots. The rent was cheap, and the landlord didn't ask many questions, which at the time seemed like a plus. My unit was on the second floor, and the landlord assured me that the apartment directly above mine had been vacant for over a year. "No one's touched that place since the last tenant left," he said, trying to sound reassuring. I didn't think much of it. All I wanted was a quiet place where I could focus on my studies. And at first it was. Sure, the walls were thin, but since no one lived upstairs, I didn't have to worry about loud music or footsteps at night. That's why the first time I heard footsteps above me, I was more confused than scared. It was almost 2 a.m. I was up studying for a biology exam when I heard slow, deliberate footsteps crossing the ceiling. I even paused my music to make sure I wasn't imagining it. But the steps continued. A few, then silence, as if someone was pacing in circles or just shifting around. The next night it happened again. Same time, same sound. I banged on the ceiling with a broom handle like an idiot, hoping that if someone was up there, maybe a squatter, they'd respond somehow. Nothing. The next day I texted the landlord and he just replied, "It's still vacant. Probably the pipes." That made no sense. I knew what pipes sounded like, and that wasn't it. Still, he didn't seem concerned, so I decided to let it go for a few days. But the noises continued. always after midnight, always the same uneven rhythm of footsteps. And over time, something started to feel different. It was like the air itself got heavier whenever the sound began. It wasn't just the noise. I started waking up in the middle of the night with the absolute certainty that someone was watching me. I can't explain it well. I just opened my eyes, my heart racing, and know I wasn't alone. Each time I checked, doors locked, windows secure, nothing out of place. But that feeling never went away. One night after hearing something heavy fall upstairs, I grabbed a flashlight and went to check the door in the hallway that led up to the top floor. I hadn't looked at it since I moved in. It was supposed to be locked, but when I got there, the knob was hanging loose, and the frame around the lock was splintered, like someone had kicked it from the outside. I stood there for a long time, staring at the door. My first instinct was to run back to my apartment, lock everything, and pretend I hadn't seen it. But curiosity won. I nudged the door open with my foot. It gave a long, horrible creak, like it hadn't been opened in years. The air in the stairwell smelled like dust, dampness, and something sour. I turned on the flashlight and aimed it upward. The beam revealed strange marks on the walls, as if someone had been dragging their hands, or something else, along them. I climbed slowly, step by step, holding my breath. The last stretch of stairs groaned under each step. The air grew thicker, heavy with the smell of mold and decay. When I reached the top, I saw the door to the apartment was ajar. Not much, just a crack, enough to see part of the floor inside. I pushed it open slowly. The sound was a low, deep moan, as if the hinges were protesting after years of silence. The inside was completely dark. No electricity, no furniture, nothing. Except for one thing, an old torn mattress lying right in the center of the room. And judging by its position, it was directly above where my bed was downstairs. I took a step forward, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The beam swept across the mattress, and my stomach turned. There were dark reddish stains soaked deep into the fabric, as if they had dried long ago. It wasn't dirt. It was blood. A lot of it. I stepped back immediately. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I practically ran out of the apartment, down the stairs 2 at a time, and locked my door with every bolt I had. I shoved a chair under the handle and sat in the living room shaking with all the lights on. I didn't sleep that night. I just listened. Every creak in the building made me hold my breath. Around 3:30 a.m., the footsteps started again, but this time it wasn't the usual uneven rhythm. I heard something heavy dragging across the ceiling, like fabric, or something crawling. Then 3 loud, solid thuds right above me, as if someone had fallen to their knees on the floor. The worst part wasn't the sound. It was the closeness. It didn't sound hollow, not like an empty space. It was dense, near, as if the person, or whatever it was right above me, just inches away. I thought about calling the police, but stopped. What was I supposed to say? I broke into the upstairs unit, found a blood-stained mattress, and now I hear things moving above me. I'd sound insane. So I stayed there, frozen the whole night, waiting for silence to return. And when it finally did, it wasn't relief I felt. It was worse. A tense calm, like something had gone still. Watching, waiting. The next morning, when I finally worked up the courage to go back upstairs, I took my phone ready to record everything. I needed proof of what I'd seen. I climbed the stairs slowly, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. But when I reached the top, everything had changed. The door was closed and the frame, which had been splintered the night before, was now perfectly repaired. The loose doorknob was gone. Everything looked as if it had never been broken. Still, I knew what I'd seen. I had a photo on my phone of the broken frame and dangling handle. I showed it to the landlord that same day, hoping he'd finally take me seriously. But he just looked annoyed, as if I were making the whole thing up. He said the door had been reinforced months ago, and that it was impossible for it to have been damaged. When I asked if anyone had access to the upstairs unit, he shrugged. "I haven't had keys to that one in a long time," he said. No one's supposed to be in there. You're probably stressed from school. You should get some sleep. I left his office feeling more alone than ever, a mix of anger and fear. That night I slept on the couch with all the lights on. Nothing happened. No footsteps, no dragging, no knocks. The next night was the same. Total silence. But the silence wasn't comforting. It felt intentional, like the whole place was holding its breath. I started avoiding the apartment as much as I could. Spent hours at the library or crashed at friends' places. Even during the day, the feeling of being watched never went away. Sometimes I thought I saw shadows move in the corner of my eye, right where the ceiling met the wall. 2 weeks later, I came back from a weekend trip to grab some clothes. Everything looked the same, until I walked into my bedroom. I looked up and saw them. Right above my bed, in the same spot where I used to hear the footsteps, were 3 circular indentations in the plaster ceiling. Perfectly spaced, the exact size and distance of knees hitting the floor hard. I stared at those dents for a long time. I knew they hadn't been there before I left. I didn't unpack anything. I grabbed my stuff, walked out, and never went back. I broke the lease early and moved out without looking behind me. I never told anyone. Who would have believed me? It's been over a year and I still think about that place. I've tried to come up with a logical explanation. Maybe someone broke in. Maybe I was just overtired. Maybe I imagined it all. But nothing fits. The broken lock that later appeared fixed. The blood-soaked mattress. The marks on the ceiling. The silence that felt too deliberate. And that unbearable sense that someone was right above me all the time. I don't know what was in that apartment, and honestly, I don't want to know. I just know one thing. Something in that place was wrong, and worst of all, it knew I was there. Story 7. I'm not really sure why I'm writing this. I suppose part of me needs someone to tell me I didn't imagine it, that what happened in that cabin was real, and that I'm not losing my mind. It all happened at the end of September last year. I'd finalized my divorce a few weeks earlier, and honestly, I just wanted to disappear for a while. No traffic, no emails, no well-meaning friends trying to see how I was doing. I found a listing for a hunting cabin in Montana. Isolated, no neighbors, no cell signal, no distractions. Perfect. The photos showed a small one-room place surrounded by trees with a porch and a stone fireplace. I rented it for 2 weeks, loaded up the truck, and left without telling anyone exactly where I was going. I just wanted silence. The first few days were exactly what I needed. The nights were cold, but there was plenty of firewood, and I spent my time cooking, reading, and walking the area. Behind the cabin, there was a trail that went down to a small creek. I'd go there in the mornings with a thermos of coffee and sit listening to the water run. It was a peace I hadn't felt in years, the kind of calm you only find after living too long in the city. But around the 4th day, I started noticing odd things. Nothing major at first, just silly details. A bag of trail mix more empty than I remembered. A draft at night even though I swore I'd shut the door. I thought I was imagining things. After all, I was alone and emotionally exhausted. Then I saw the muddy footprints, not inside the cabin but on the porch. They were fresh. It hadn't rained in days, but the ground near the creek stayed damp, and those prints seemed to come from there, circling the cabin, not just passing along the path. I stared at them for a long time, searching for a logical explanation. Maybe a hiker or a hunter, but no. They were human prints from boots, and there were no other tracks around. I barely slept that night. I heard creaks on the roof, slow-spaced footsteps, as if someone were walking carefully up there. Every time the wind blew, I told myself it was branches or some animal looking for warmth, but it didn't sound like that. The next morning, I found something that froze my blood. A can of chili I'd left on the counter had disappeared, not moved. Not knocked to the floor, just gone. I know it sounds insignificant, but when you're completely alone in the middle of the woods and something disappears inside the cabin, it feels different. I checked every corner, convinced I must have put it somewhere else. No, it wasn't there. And that's when I understood. Someone was coming in. That same afternoon, I decided to drive to the nearest town, about 40 minutes away. I bought a cheap trail camera, the kind hunters use to record animals in motion. I told myself it was to catch a raccoon or a curious bear, but deep down I knew I hoped to catch something else. I got back before dusk and hid the camera among the trees, aimed at the back of the cabin. I set it to capture any movement coming from the creek path. That night I didn't light the fireplace. I wrapped myself in a blanket and sat in the dark with the flashlight off, listening. The footsteps returned, softer this time, as if whoever it was knew I was awake. I also heard a faint, steady sound, the rustle of leaves moving, but not from the wind. It was like something was crawling very slowly around the house. I didn't sleep at all, and when the sun began to rise, I ran out to check the camera. My hands trembled as I put the SD card into my laptop. The first recordings were normal. Some deer, squirrels, shadows of branches swaying. Until I got to the clip from 2:47 a.m., my heart stopped. There was a man standing among the trees looking directly toward the cabin. He wore a dark hooded sweatshirt, and his face was completely in shadow. He didn't move. He didn't approach. He just stood there, watching. 5 whole minutes like that, motionless, until the recording cut off. I watched it over and over, wishing it was a trick of light, a shadow, anything. But it wasn't. There was someone watching me. After that, I wanted to leave. I thought about it several times as I packed, but something, pride maybe, or the fear of admitting I was scared, stopped me. I decided to stay, though I took precautions. I started locking the bedroom door from the inside, left a knife on the nightstand, and propped small twigs by the entrance, a kind of improvised tripwire, just so I'd know if someone moved them. And they did. The next morning, one of the twigs was gone, and another can of chili too. The worst part wasn't that. The worst part was the muddy smear on the inside doorknob of the front door. That meant he'd been inside while I slept. I felt a pit in my stomach, a mix of disgust and pure terror. There was no more doubt, no more imagination. Someone was entering the cabin at night. That day I packed everything. I didn't care about losing the deposit or explaining anything to the owner. I locked the door, loaded the truck, and got ready to leave for good. But before I left, I wanted to check the camera one last time. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I needed a final confirmation. Tangible proof that I wasn't crazy. The last video, recorded right before dawn, froze me. The same man was there again, closer this time, about 20 feet from the cabin. Same hoodie, same stillness. Only now he was holding something in his hand. I don't know if it was a stick, a tool, or a weapon, but he gripped it tightly, as if ready to use it. And the most chilling part, he was looking directly into the camera lens. As soon as I saw that final recording, I left immediately. I didn't wait for breakfast, didn't take out the trash, didn't even check if I'd forgotten anything. I tossed the keys on the table, got in the truck, and drove off without looking back. I drove for hours straight toward Missoula. I didn't stop even for gas until the fuel light started blinking. The whole way I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting to see headlights following me down the empty road. I don't know why I didn't go to the police. Maybe because I felt they wouldn't believe me. No one had stolen anything, aside from a couple of cans of food. And the camera only showed a man standing among the trees, his face unclear. What was I going to tell them? A stranger watched me every night from the woods. It sounded ridiculous. Even so, I emailed the cabin's owner. I told him the place wasn't safe, though I avoided details. I didn't want him to think I was crazy or trying to cause trouble. I just wanted to forget it. But I couldn't. For weeks after I left, I kept waking up at 2:47 a.m., always at that time. Even in my new apartment with reinforced doors and every light on, I'd snap awake with my heart racing, as if something invisible were calling me from that cabin. Sometimes I'd dream I was still there, trapped between the wooden walls, and the man was outside looking at me through the window, still waiting. I moved apartments, changed the locks, even adopted a dog, but the feeling of being watched never fully went away. That idea that someone can be so close, so silent, so patient, still unsettles me more than anything else. Because that man wasn't trying to break in. He wasn't trying to steal, and he was waiting. Waiting for what? I don't know, and I'd rather not find out. I've told this story to a couple of friends, but I always leave out a few parts. I never show them the video. I'd feel like, in some way, I'd be giving him more power. I don't know if he lived nearby or if he just saw me arrive and decided to follow me. I don't know if he's done it to other people since, or if I was the only one who noticed. All I know is that after I left, it all stopped. No strange noises, no face in the shadows, no car following me. It's as if that belonged to the cabin, or maybe to the land itself. I'll never rent a place that isolated again. Lesson learned. There's no shocking ending, no satisfying explanation. Just this certainty that comes to me every time the wind blows in the middle of the night. He knew I was there, and somehow, I still feel like he knows where I am now. Story 8. I'm 32 now, but this happened when I was 25, just after I moved back to Arkansas to help my father after he'd suffered a stroke. I had quit my job in Nashville and was trying to adjust to a slower, quieter life. Most of my days were spent running errands, managing his medication, and driving around town to pick things up. I wasn't exactly happy about returning to the small town I'd worked so hard to leave behind, but family is family. That night I was driving back from a friend's house about an hour away from my dad's place. I'd taken an alternate route, an old highway through the hills, to avoid construction on the main road. It was a route I knew well, or at least I thought I did. It was close to 11 p.m. The sky was pitch black, no streetlights, no houses, just trees and stars pressing in over the narrow two-lane road. My phone had no signal, but that was normal in that area. I had the windows cracked open and was listening to an old playlist when suddenly I saw headlights in the rearview mirror. At first I didn't think much of it, but that truck started getting too close. I could tell it was an old pickup, maybe from the 80s or 90s by its square frame and the way the lights flickered with every bump. Then it started flashing its high beams, short bursts at first. I thought maybe my taillights weren't working, so I slowed a bit to signal that I'd noticed. But the flashing didn't stop. If anything, it got more intense, longer, more aggressive bursts. The truck didn't try to pass me, not even when the road widened enough to do so. I was going about 5 kilometers over the speed limit, trying to keep distance, but it stayed glued to my bumper. There was something in the way it moved. Not clumsy, not erratic, not distracted. It was deliberate, as if that person had no other purpose than to follow me. 15 minutes passed like that. My nerves were shot. I remember gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles hurt. I was too far from home to turn around and too afraid to stop in the middle of nowhere. Then I saw it, the green lights of a gas station in the distance, an old rundown Shell station I'd stopped at once years before. I knew it usually closed around 10, but I didn't care. I just needed a place with light, with cameras, with anything that could break the darkness. When I pulled into the lot, I checked the rear-view mirror, and the truck was gone. When I parked by the pumps, I looked again toward the highway, expecting to see its headlights appear any second. Nothing. Total silence. I figured maybe it had turned off somewhere I hadn't noticed, but that didn't make sense. There were no side roads for miles. Still, I tried to convince myself that's what had happened. The station was, as expected, closed. The lights inside were still on, but the door was chained with a sign that read, "Back at 6 a.m." The overhead lights above the pumps cast a dull yellow glow over the lot, which made me feel a little safer. I got out, pretending to check my tires just to calm myself down, to give my hands something to do. Every few seconds I turned toward the road, waiting for that truck to reappear. A few minutes passed. I got back in the car, kept the engine running, and locked the doors. My breathing slowed, but that pressure at the back of my neck, that feeling of being watched, wouldn't go away, even though there was no one in sight. Finally, I decided it was best to leave. I shifted into reverse, and just before pulling out of the lot, I noticed something. Off to the side, just beyond the reach of the lights, the ground had fresh tire tracks. Deep ones, recent, as if a heavy vehicle had pulled in, idled for a while, and then left. I followed the trail with my eyes. The marks led back to the road, in the same direction I had come from. A cold knot twisted in my gut. I turned off the engine for a moment, listening, waiting to hear the rumble of a motor hidden somewhere in the dark. Nothing, just the faint electric hum of the gas station lights. That night I barely slept. I lay awake for hours, replaying every second of the drive, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe the guy was drunk. Maybe he thought I was someone else. Anything but what my instincts screamed, that something was deeply wrong about all of it. The next morning, I couldn't stand it anymore. I needed answers. I called the gas station and asked if I could speak to someone about the security cameras. A man named Marcus answered. I told him roughly what had happened. To my surprise, he said yes. They did have recordings, and if I wanted, I could come by to look. I went there that same afternoon, still feeling sick to my stomach. When I arrived, Marcus looked at me with a mix of curiosity and unease. Then he showed me the footage, and what I saw froze me. Marcus rewound the recording to 11:08 p.m., the exact time I had pulled into the gas station. On the screen, I saw my car enter, stop by the pumps, headlights on. Everything looked normal. Then he paused the video and frowned. "There's something you should see," he said, lowering the volume. He rewound 5 minutes and back to 11:03 p.m. And there it was, the same truck. An old boxy model with the left headlight flickering, exactly as I remembered. The same one that had ridden my bumper for nearly 20 minutes. The problem was that according to the footage, that truck had arrived before me. You could see it pull into the lot, creep up to the edge of the pavement, idle there for 2 full minutes, and then back out, driving off in the opposite direction, 5 minutes before I arrived. Marcus fast-forwarded the video. My car entered the lot. Behind me, the road was completely empty. No truck, no headlights, nothing. I was speechless. I asked him to check again. Maybe there was a glitch or a blind spot in the cameras. But no, the video was continuous. My car arrived alone, and according to the recording, the truck had already left before I got there. I felt the floor shift beneath me. The whole drive, I had seen it behind me, the high beams, the flashes, that pressure in my back. I'd seen it. I'd felt it. There was no way I had imagined it. Marcus shrugged, his face serious, and said something that chilled me even more. "You're not the first person who's asked to check the footage for something like this." His tone was flat, almost resigned, as if these things happened more often than anyone wanted to admit. I asked what he meant, and he said sometimes people came in talking about old trucks or strange figures near the lot, and when they checked the recordings, the details never matched. Sometimes the vehicles appeared before, sometimes after, sometimes not at all. "Most people don't come back," he added, avoiding my eyes. I didn't know what to say. I thanked him and walked out to the parking lot. Before getting into my car, I took one last look around. The asphalt was clean, no tire marks, no flickering headlights between the trees, only silence. Since then, I've driven that road a few times, but only during the day and never alone. I've never seen that truck again, and yet I still can't explain it. How could it have been right behind me for miles, just a few feet from my bumper, and at the same time arrived before I did? No plates, no visible driver, no trace on the cameras. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was trying to intimidate me or warn me. Sometimes I think maybe it wasn't trying to hurt me at all. Maybe, just maybe, it was trying to stop me from getting somewhere. Or worse, trying to get there first. I have no answers, only memories, and a kind of fear that doesn't fade with time. I'm telling this in case someone out there has seen it too. An old pickup with no plates, a flickering left headlight that follows your car in the dark and disappears just before you reach the light.